Kelly. We are here for the NFL Week 9 final look NFL DFS strategy show on Awesemo. I'm filling in for Chris Randone, who had an emergency bachelor-related flight to Napa Valley. Don't ask me what it's all about, but he did.
That's the worst. That's the worst.
No, I know. I'm waiting for my emergency Napa flight. It's going to happen any day. But he did tell me if you want to feel just a little bit better about it, he is on a 6-month no drinking diet. So he's going to be in Napa, just not partaking in any of the delicious wine. So.
Wow. Yeah, I guess I buried my own lead there by saying that was I didn't know if that's why Chris wasn't here. I guess I just didn't even ask, but yeah, that's pretty cool for him though. Napa, I ended up actually going last summer. I was in San Francisco. It's a beautiful place. So hopefully he's having fun.
Nice. Yeah, I definitely would like to go there one day. Have not been. We are actually fortunate in Vancouver. We have some wine territory that's not too far from here. It's like our own little mini Napa. It's not as good, but it'll do for sure. Nice. All right, we got a lot to talk about today. This is a pretty ugly slate here, but I feel like this is why DFS was invented, to make these horrible, ugly slates fun to play and fun to watch. First off, we got to give a shout out to our sponsor, Yahoo Fantasy Football, Yahoo Fantasy Basketball, Daily Fantasy on Yahoo. Daily Fantasy on Yahoo is getting bigger by the minute. If you have not been playing over there, you should definitely go check it out. Of course, this week they have the 250K baller, 25K to first place, 27,000 people in it, but only a $10 entry. And $250,000 in prizes. You can check out the show that Awesemo and I do every Friday afternoon, where we build lineups, we build cash lineups, we build GPP lineups, and we just talk about some of the higher projected games on the slate. That is available on the YouTube channel as well. And one of the things Alex always says is that you should be putting your money into Yahoo first, because a lot less pros play there, and the action is a lot less sharp. So just make sure that you go over there and check it out, because it's definitely worthwhile. What you've been playing it all on Yahoo, Sal?
Yeah, that's a good question. Honestly, I have not been playing there as much as I should. And I mean, it's nothing against Yahoo. It's probably just my own laziness in balancing sites. I've been playing more on another sponsor of the show and other shows, FantasyDraft, a little bit more.
Yeah, that's FantasyDraft's great too. But yeah, you should go check it out. I used to have that same kind of like thing where I was like, I won't play on Yahoo, and like once I went over there, I have not gone back. It's been hugely profitable so far, so I definitely recommend checking it out. All right, we got a lot to get into. Just give me your general thoughts on this slate before we start. Basically, what we're going to do is just go game by game. We're going to talk about ownership. We're going to talk about some injuries, some key injuries, and some pivots. And I know that you're all here to hear Sal talk and not me. So we're going to make sure that we're getting as much information out of Sal as possible. When I first opened this slate and I first looked at it, the first thing that stood out to me was that this looked like a week to pay up at running back. Dalvin Cook, Christian McCaffrey, Le'Veon Bell in a really sweet spot. And then to pay down at wide receiver. Of course, as the weeks develop, we've gotten some bargains at running back. What's your general take on this slate?
Yeah, so right when I opened the slate, I just thought the entire slate was priced up. I mean, it was really difficult in terms of, you have two really good running back options that are extremely priced up. All the decent and quality wide receivers who are used to being in like the 6K range are now priced all the way up to the 7K range. And there's just really a void in the middle range. And we were, at least at the beginning of the week, lacking a lot of value. I mean, it seems like Jalen Samuels is about to come through and just save everybody's day when it comes to value. But yeah, it's just a slate that is priced tightly. We see 3 tight ends in the 6K range, which we haven't really seen all season. So punting at tight end is opening up a little bit more. So I think, yeah, like you said, it's sort of an ugly slate, but I think there's not a clear-cut strategy to go towards it, and there's just a lot of moving pieces. So I would say one of the more difficult slates on the year, but it seems like it might be bailed out by Jalen Samuels just becoming a chalk option that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And we will get into Jalen Samuels, but right now it's looking like we have him projected for about 60% ownership.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think you cut out on my end. I don't know if it's on me, but yeah, I know he's very highly owned. And I was just talking about this actually earlier today. Oh, yeah, there you go. Yeah, you cut in and out, but yeah, I heard you say about just the ownership number being high on him. And yeah, it's a number that is a spot really that's just kind of dependent on what you want to do. If you want to end up just going about and going over it, that's probably what I'll end up doing. But I don't think that you have to take an extremely strong stance on it in terms of going under it. Like if he's 50, 60% owned, that's a good number to come in around. I personally, though, will probably be going above it just because it's a 4K running back in a sweet spot where not only is his running back ahead of him and Connor being out, his backup running back is going to be out as well for 2 to 3 weeks, Benny Snell. And then it's a team that wants to run the ball in Pittsburgh and throw the ball. And Mason Rudolph's ADOT right now is so low. So yeah, I'm fine getting over that number. There's similar spot last year, not as identical, but Spencer Ware was I think $600 more and a better offense for sure, better quarterback with the Chiefs at that time. But now you save $600 for a running back who should probably see 16 plus touches, and I honestly would project him for around 4 receptions in this game. He's just a smash play option.
Right there with you, man. Right there with you. Hey, as you're watching here, if you wouldn't mind helping us out and giving this video a like, we greatly appreciate it. Helps us keep these videos free and helps us in the YouTube algorithm, helps us rank a little bit better, get more people in here. So we greatly appreciate you guys tuning in and watching this. And if you can hit that like button, we definitely appreciate it. So let's get into these games here. Let's start out with the grossest game on the slate, probably the Buffalo Bills. The Washington at Buffalo. Buffalo 9.5 favorites, only a 36.5 total in this one. Likely no Darius Geis. He did practice earlier on Monday. We have no Chris Thompson. He is out. AP is pretty cheap, and the way to attack this Buffalo defense is through the run and not the pass. We also have Vernon Davis out. Give me your general thoughts on this one, Sal.
Yeah, so I mean, like earlier in the week, I thought Adrian Peterson would be maybe a sneaky type of tournament play when we didn't have Jalen Samuels, when Case Keenum was potentially going to be the quarterback here. Adrian Peterson is the only thing I would touch from Washington this week. But even that, I'm really not too high on. I don't think you have to get there as much now that some more value has opened up. I do think it's still, I mean, he's tournament viable because he's just touchdown dependent and he's going to be low owned. And that's a spot that you would take a chance on it. But Washington in general, not going to get there. It just seems like an absolutely brutal spot for this whole entire team, for Terry McLaurin, putting Dwayne Haskins back in, just not good. On the Buffalo side of it, Devin Singletary becomes interesting, but I do think it's a week where you see more Frank Gore usage than last week and maybe even more touches overall. And then it just gets down to you can pay for John Brown. I think he's one of the better options in the 6K range. I think he's one of the options on this slate that just stands out as not being overpriced and being probably appropriately priced to underpriced. He lines up 46% of the time on the left side of the field. Josh Norman lines up about 76% of the time on that side of the field. And Josh Norman has been atrocious this year. 140.7 passer rating against, 416 yards and 5 touchdowns allowed. He's one of the worst cornerbacks in the league so far. So for this game, for me, it's really just John Brown. I don't get to much Josh Allen because I don't want to be stacking Brown with Cole Beasley. Beasley more of like a cash type play if you wanted to go there. So really, it's just John Brown from the entire game. Adrian Peterson, if you wanted to own him at like 4 or 5%, I think that's okay for GPPs, but probably unnecessary.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. It's a pivot move, I guess. What you're going to see is Adrian Peterson down around 2% ownership, probably mainly because of this Jalen Samuels news. I would imagine that he would have been a little bit higher. Do you think the odds are, let's say, because I'm guessing that both Peterson and Samuels will see like similar workloads, obviously in very different positions. If Peterson's 2.2 to 3% owned and Samuels is 60% owned, am I crazy for thinking that in a vacuum here, Peterson's the better play?
I want to say crazy because in terms of like game theory wise, yeah, it's much easier to have a lot of Peterson in your lineup relative to the field, have like 6-8% of him and be 4 times the field on it. But if it goes bad, you're not ruining your lineups. So you could play a good amount of Samuels. You can match the field. You can go over the field with 60-70% of Samuels and still have like 6% or 8% of your lineups with Adrian Peterson. So if things go really bad with Samuels, you're pretty much leveraging against yourself with, well, now I have a lot of leverage on this other value. So I actually think that's an okay option. I do still prefer heavily Samuels, even at the ownership difference, just because I can pretty confidently project Samuels to see like 6 points in the passing game. Whereas with Adrian Peterson, he could lay a goose egg and probably more times than not does in the passing game. So just the volume that these guys will be getting. Samuels I have right now for more volume. But like I think that's an interesting spot to you can leverage the field on both of these guys, and it could actually end up helping you out if things go wrong with Samuel.
Yeah, that's a great point, and maybe a little bit more so in half point PPR because Adrian Peterson does not get targets, just 4 targets in his last 6 games. So that pretty much means you're relying on the run game, and you're relying on Washington being able to score touchdowns for him to pay off his value. So that is not exactly a bet that I want to rely on, but you might want to think about sprinkling in the odd lineup here. Just give me your general thoughts on Josh Allen this week because We have him chalkier on some sites. On Yahoo, he's grading out as one of Osimo's better values, 6,500 on DraftKings. Will you be using him? Do you think he's like a fine cash game play? What's your take on that?
He's just, I mean, he's the same price as last week. He's a guy that I want to play. Like now that you have no Lamar Jackson or Murray on this slate, Kyler, he's the number one option in terms of rushing yards per game and rushing attempts. So there's an upside there. It's just like the relative nature of the slate in cash and even GPPs. I'd rather pay up. So specifically for cash, I'd rather pay up or go down to other guys like Winston, pay up to guys like Wilson or Matt Stafford in cash. And then when you're talking about GPPs and I want to stack more times than I don't in team and game stack, really just John Brown's the only thing that stands out for me. And then if you're talking about game stacks, there's just nothing from Washington that really stands out. So it's just a matter of him not having a true number two option. And if you think it's Cole Beasley, it's very touchdown dependent. But then on the opposing side, there's just nothing to run it back with. So a fine quarterback, like the ideas of running him naked from last year, him winning tournaments, I guess that's there somewhat, but it's just so difficult to see that working out now that there's so many more quarterbacks in the league that have clear options. So I probably just don't get to him. And it does feel off because he is such a quality producer, but I probably won't get there.
Final thoughts. Buffalo Bills defense, one of the chalkier options on this slate. Are you paying up for them this week, or are you paying down at D?
Yeah, so I mean, my stance is just I always will look for 3,000 or below home favorites that have a good pass rush against the offensive line. We have like 3 of those this week, so I'm probably not going to get to Buffalo. That said, I think this is the best spot, even better than some of the Patriots matchups against the Dolphins and so be it. I think this is the best spot on the entire year for a defense against Dwayne Haskins in Buffalo is probably the toughest place to play when it starts to become this time of the year as a double-digit favorite. So if you want to pay up for them, I think it's fine. I think it's honestly more okay to do it in tournaments than cash because they are so variant of a position. But I personally just look for good matchups, offensive, defensive line below 3K, especially at home. And it seems like we have at least 2 or 3 of those on the slate.
All right. I like it. Great analysis as always, Sal. Let's move on to the next game here. We have the Carolina Panthers minus 3.5 favorites at home to the Tennessee Titans. That line's moved a little bit. Tennessee 41.5 total. We have Curtis Samuel questionable. We have Delaney Walker out. General thoughts on this one, Sal?
Yeah, so I mean, from the Tennessee side of it, Derrick Henry stands out as an option because he's just getting too cheap here. And the thing that really stands out, Thursday I talked about it with Lofty, you have Tampa Bay giving up the 7th most fantasy points per game to running backs, but they give up the least receptions. So what that means is they're just giving up a lot of rushing touchdowns. They give the most 10 so far this season, the most in the league. But they also just give up a ton of rushing yards, which fits the build of Derrick Henry a lot. Rushing touchdowns, he has a ton of 18 right now, red zone carries, and also just rushing yards on the ground. So them giving up a lot of points in ways that don't come for pass catching running backs is good for Henry. So I actually have interest in Henry in the $5,700 price point in that range. Outside of that, nothing stands out for Tennessee. The wide receivers are going to have more brutal matchups this week. I'd expect James Bradbury to be on Corey Davis. A.J. Brown should see Dante Jackson, who hasn't been shut down this year, but has a lot of speed. And the big plays of A.J. Brown probably won't be there. Jonnu Smith will be the starting tight end. The issue with Jonnu Smith is not his talent or anything. It's just like this is a guy that's on the field for maybe 20 routes. So the ideas of him continuing to have like 15 fantasy point days are probably not there. So yeah, I lean Derrick Henry, and that's about it. This is like the first week I actually have some true interest in Derrick Henry. And just from the Carolina side of it, yeah, McCaffrey's fine. Like if you want to pay up for McCaffrey at 10K, you can now, and it becomes a lot easier with Jalen Samuel opening up and some other values. If you take out those Tampa Bay games, I mean, this guy is averaging like almost 35 plus fantasy points per game. And even with them, he's averaging like 31. So he's just great. Like he's a dual threat. There's not much more to say about Christian McCaffrey. I prefer Dalvin Cook slightly this week, but I'll have a good amount of both of them. DJ Moore and Curtis Samuel both should be fine options this week. I'll side with DJ Moore at $4,800 if picking one. Really good value in that range. We'll face Malcom Butler, who has not been that great this year, especially he's not been great at all. Mike Evans last week kind of tore him apart. But when he faces receivers that have both a speed and size combination, he's also lacking. So that's really it. It's really just McCaffrey and DJ Moore. Greg Olsen, I think, is though an interesting option who hasn't been producing all that much, but still running the 5th most routes in the league for a tight end. And he's only 3,500 if you're looking for sort of a punt option.
Yeah, it makes total sense to me. So Derrick Henry, just for a quick sec, it's not looking like he's getting a lot of ownership. I know that on Yahoo he grades out really well for Osimo and pretty well on the other sides as well as a solid value. Are you at all worried about maybe negative game script and or just the semi stout Carolina run defense. We saw them get torched last week by Tevin Coleman, but that was the aberration, not the rule. Do you think does the matchup scare you away at all, or is just the price point just too good?
So I don't think the matchup scares me away. And yeah, a lot of that is due to price point and just overall workload. Like he's getting 18.9 rushing attempts per game. He's priced as the 12th most expensive running back, but he gets the 6th most opportunities. So there's sort of a difference there. Obviously, he doesn't have the passing game usage. So getting him on sites like FanDuel might make a little bit more sense. But I like the overall matchup. And then also just for Henry here, you're coming in a spot where even if his team is down a touchdown, and we've seen it all year long, like they can be down by 14 for the whole game and he'll still see 15 carries. Like they just need to give him the ball. They don't have much of an offense around that. So if they're just within a touchdown or even leading in this game, you're probably seeing Derrick Henry see somewhere around 20 touches, even if they're down by a touchdown.
Yeah, makes total sense to me. I'm with you there. I like the Henry play, and because his ownership isn't getting up as well, I'm a big fan of it. Over on Yahoo, he's a great bargain as well. So what are we doing with Curtis Samuel here? He had a really weird practice week where he didn't practice on Wednesday or Friday, but was a full participant on Thursday. This is much ado about nothing, and he's going right. Is that that's kind of my takeaway here? But what's yours?
Yeah, I think he'll be fine to play here. The initial reports are, or right now is what it is, shoulder injury. He's listed as questionable, but what they're saying is that he's likely to play. So I'd expect him to play. Like I said, I prefer here just DJ Moore. I think the ownership on DJ Moore is a little bit higher, and his price point is also higher. So it's an okay pivot to Samuel in the same exact game with a quality matchup. The individual matchup for the majority of the game for Moore is just going to be better for him, but you're still going to have an okay matchup on the outside for Curtis Samuel in this one. Adore Jackson is going to be somewhat of a tough matchup for him. Definitely a tougher matchup than DJ Moore, but one that Curtis Samuel can win. And it's also none of these will be shadow treatments, so they'll be moving around a good amount of this game. You'll see Curtis Samuel out of the backfield in the slot. So they both have upside there. If DJ Moore's ownership continues to come up, the last time I checked, it was right around average. If it becomes too chalky, then I think it's an easy pivot for the same exact game and a lot of the same matchups just to Curtis Samuel.
I am right there with you. All right, I feel like we covered that game pretty well. Let's move it on. Who we got next here? We got the Philadelphia Eagles hosting the Chicago Bears. Philadelphia 5-point favorites, 42.5 total. Desean Jackson looks like he's going to play. I think he's still listed as questionable. Decent price across the industry. General thoughts on this one, and what are you doing with Desean Jackson? Are you taking a wait and see approach to his return, or
yeah, it's probably going to be a wait and see approach for me, just because he's been optimistic all week, and they really have been optimistic that he would return this week for a couple weeks now. But I still think there's going to be some sort of limited basis on him. And even if there's not, I just personally don't want to take that risk on a slate where I think there's just better options, even at lower price points. So what he's going to do, though, is just change his whole offense. So they've been really lacking somebody to open up the field and make them not narrow. Alshon Jeffrey has not been a deep threat this whole season. He catches a couple deep balls, but for the most part, not running those routes. And Zach Ertz has been getting doubled in the middle of the team. So it's in the middle of the field. So it's going to hurt or help Zach Ertz the most here with Djax being out there. So at his price point, it makes me like Ertz even more, who I thought was going to have higher ownership this week, but right now doesn't. So yeah, from the Philadelphia side right now, all I'm really getting to is Zach Ertz. I do think Jordan Howard is a quality GPP play at his ownership. That doesn't mean get 25% of him, but the guy's 2% owned. If I come in with 6%, I'll feel pretty good about that sort of a leverage on him.
Yeah, fascinating here. It's looking like this is kind of tight end 1 and tight end 2 scenario in Philadelphia right now, but we're seeing that price point reflect his usage and his just kind of down season, I guess, for Zach Ertz. So I'm kind of confused as to what to do with him, but it's interesting to hear you say that you're on board with it. You're not at all worried about the lack of production there, or about the fact that Dallas Goedert is taking over some of this role?
No, so yeah, that's actually a good point in the 2 tight end sets. So last year, Philadelphia ran the most 2 tight end sets, 12 personnel. Goddard saw the most snaps that he saw all season by 5 in the last game. The advantage, though, is that Ertz's snaps and routes run are not coming down at all. They're just using more 2 tight end sets. And a big reason why is just no Desean Jackson. They need to get a little bit creative with the offense. So with Desean Jackson coming back, I think, and they should, and they probably will, shift out of a lot of 12 personnel, 2 tight ends on the field, to a lot more 11 personnel, because Matt Collins has not been playing a ton of snaps, around 50% of the time. So is what this Philadelphia Eagles team is running 3 wide receivers. And that's just not the way that they're built. Matt Collins, the replacement for Desean Jackson, 0 catches the last 4 games. 0. one catch the last 5 games. I mean, he's been terrible. So,
I know it all too well in showdown slates.
Oh yeah, yeah, because he's like what 300. He was like $200 or something
Yeah,
the 1 week.
killed me.
Got no catches, just terrible. Yeah, I remember that one too. But it's going to actually help. I think Desean Jackson. It's going to take Goddard off the field more, not a ton, but maybe 5-10%. So yeah, I'm not too concerned about it. And like you said, it's reflected in the price, and honestly, probably wrongfully reflected. Zach Ertz has a 30-point like ceiling and potential in him that not a lot of tight ends do, and he's priced around tight ends that you're hoping to get you like 10 points.
Yeah, fair enough. I have seen Mitch Trubisky kind of talked about a little bit as a contrarian play. He's certainly cheap enough on this slate. He won a couple people $1 million twice last year, I want to say. Like there were a couple Bears stacks. Is this Bears offense just too much of a nightmare right now to roster, or are you sneaking in like a couple, 1 or 2 Chicago stacks up against this terrible Eagles secondary in the hopes that maybe they can refine some of that magic from last year?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely like a Millie Maker only type thing. Allen Robinson, Anthony Miller with Mitch Trubisky. I won't be getting there, mainly because, I mean, yeah, Trubisky's been terrible, but like a big reason why he was winning things for people last year. I mean, he had like a 5 touchdown game. There was a week where the Millie Maker was like 5 Bears last season.
Yeah.
But it was a Bears fan. It was pretty crazy. Like it was in his name. Pretty cool. But Mitch Trubisky, dead last in fantasy points per attempt, 0.327, dead last in touchdown percentage. And the thing that really stands out in terms of like trying to win you a Millie Maker is he's only running the ball 5.7 rushing yards per game. That's behind Ryan Fitzpatrick, behind Baker Mayfield, who might seem like he's a rushing quarterback, but he's not. He's a pocket quarterback. So it's just not a lot of upside for him. I do like a couple of his passing options. Allen Robinson falls in a weird range where I think he's a good play, but 6,800, I'd rather just pay up for the 7K guys. Or just take a huge drop down to the lower 6K range. Although if you do get there, I think it's okay. Over 9 targets per game. He's getting like a third of the red zone targets on this team. And again, really quality matchup. And I think Anthony Miller, if you really want to kind of punt wide receiver and go below the 4K range, he's like the only 3K guy outside of maybe some of the Colts receivers. But Anthony Miller at 3,700 saw his snaps come down last week, but they ran a lot of 2 wide receiver sets, and he's a slot wide receiver. They should go back up to 70% or so. I think he's sort of a sneaky GPP type play. So yeah, it's really just Allen Robinson. Anthony Miller is like a lower owned type play if you need to get there in some lineups. And then no interest in David Montgomery this week.
And no Taylor Gabriel love after I believe he played like on a 70% snap, 75% snaps last week as well.
Yeah, I think a lot of that is just like the function of how the game went in terms of like 2 wide receiver sets, which he'll still play pretty big snaps if that's the case in terms of like getting more on the outside. I'll take Anthony Miller in the slot though for just a slightly lower price point, and I'd expect his snaps to come up a little bit more. And when he's out there, even in the limited snaps, when he's out there, he continues to see his targets.
All right, makes sense to me. Let's move it on. We got Minnesota, 1.5 favorites at Kansas City, 48.5 implied total. This line obviously implies that Pat Mahomes will not be suiting up for the Chiefs. I think he is listed as questionable, but I personally would assume that he is more on the doubtful side as well. We have lots of injuries here. We got Adam Thielen questionable. And the Chiefs are just kind of devastated on both sides of the ball. Fuller, Fisher, Okafor, Clark. Give me your general take on this one, Sal.
Yeah, so it's just a tough spot to really like much of the Chiefs here. And it's a spot where they're all pretty much priced as if Patrick Mahomes is starting at the quarterback position. So that just makes it really brutal. Like Travis Kelce's been up there in a price point that's really hard to pay off as a tight end all season, and it really doesn't change at 6,900 with Matt Moore throwing you the ball. It's just not a spot I'm going to be getting to with Travis Kelce this week. Tyreek Hill, I think it's still an okay price point because of his upside, but we saw literally last week Matt Moore underthrow him on would have probably been a 70-plus yard touchdown if Patrick Mahomes is out there and just gets broken up into double coverage. So his upside's also capped, but he's still priced at 7,400. The benefit is you have Andy Reid calling plays, and you're probably going to prioritize Tyreek Hill in the passing game. It's just not enough for me to prioritize Hill, though, myself over guys in that upper range like Galladay, Lockett, Evans, Godwin. I like all those guys better at 7K. Sammy Watkins is probably the chief I would get to the most just as a 4K wide receiver who we saw involved a lot last week, saw the targets and from Matt Moore and schemed back into the offense. So it's really just Sammy Watkins from that Chiefs side, and it's really a price play, if anything.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head there. It's that these Chiefs, Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce are priced as though Mahomes is playing. There's not really much of a price discount, which makes them a lot harder to get to and in a fairly tough matchup here. So I think you hit the nail on the head there. Do you have any interest though with the discount, getting Matt Moore at a discounted price and at less than, looks like we haven't projected for less than 2% ownership? Any interest in a Chief stacks or in game stacks in this one with the decently high total and low ownership?
Yeah, so I think it's like a nice contrarian option. It's just the matchup. I think is it's going to be tough this week. They're still going to be out without some offensive linemen, so I probably go just elsewhere this week. I do think like the amount of talent on this team allows Andy Reid to play call the way that he does. But we saw him pull out like all the stops last week, aside from punting with 5 minutes left. But before that, just pull out all the stops last week, and it made Matt Moore have a quality game, but not one that probably wins you anything. And now he's probably going to have a tougher matchup going away from home here.
Yeah. All right. Minnesota side of things, Adam Thielen, questionable. If he's a go, will you be rostering him at low ownership or in some Kirk Cousins stacks? Or and conversely, if he can't go, Ole BC Johnson, he was a bit of a dud last week against Washington, pretty priced up in that showdown slate game. But he did have 8 targets and 40 yards the week before. He is $4,000 on DraftKings, so not like a great bargain, but also not a bad value as well if Thielen can't go.
Yeah, so like this was the thing that surprised me the most was how expensive these Vikings receivers were. Like the Chiefs secondary is not great, but it's been much better this season, depending on where you look for just defensive stats. It's been much better than it was last season, at least. The run defense continues to be just a run funnel, terrible part of their overall defense, dragging them down. So yeah, probably not going to get to Thielen. If Thielen's out in this one, I think it makes Diggs a little bit more viable as sort of the one-off, but it's just priced up. I mean, you have everybody on this team. Even Kirk Cousins is way too expensive to really want to stack both Thielen in Diggs at their price points. So the ownership makes sense to me because of how priced up he is. I think you could just do better in spots where the team's probably going to throw the ball for guys like Kenny Galladay and his matchup and Jameis Winston with his 2 wide receivers, 40 pass attempts for those quarterbacks, where I'd be probably surprised if I see Kirk Cousins throw more than 32 times in this game. Probably stays in the 20 range. So I'm not going to get to any of the wide receivers there. It's really just Dalvin Cook here, and I think he's a fantastic play. There's really not much that has to be said about it. It's a team that wants to run the ball against the worst run defense in the entire league that is also banged up still in their defensive line. It's a spot where Cook sees 24 opportunities per game, and he does see targets. He sees 4.3 targets per game. So if I expect Cousins to throw 28 or less times, it probably means I'm expecting a guy like Dalvin Cook to see about 22 plus overall touches.
Yeah, that's probably around where a good bet for a projection of touches, I think. First looking at this game, I wasn't super into it for the obvious reasons that it's priced up and that these guys are expensive, but and the line just isn't like, it's not in the 50s, right? It's in the high 40s, and a lot of these price points indicate that this line should be much higher. However, the ownership is like non-existent on these teams, and that's appealing for GPPs. Like we have Stephon Diggs at 1% on DraftKings right now. I'm sure that'll go up if Thielen is out, because I'm assuming people will play the bell cow. Thielen 0.5%. I'm sure that will go up as well if he's healthy, but it won't be much. And so, like, I think like you could get a really concentrated stack between Kirk Cousins and Diggs and Thielen, which has paid dividends multiple times this year already, and then bring it back with like 0.3% on Tyreek Hill. That has the makings of a pretty solid GPP lineup, I think, for a large GPP. So although I think the spots are bad, the ownership is just non-existent on this game.
Yeah, the ownership's a good call. And like, yeah, even if you go up to players who are owned, like Dalvin Cook's half his owned, or probably coming even more than that or less than that as Christian McCaffrey. So yeah, ownership spots all over. If you do see Thielen out, I do think Diggs is like a very high quality one-off wide receiver if you're in the stack that maybe like an Oakland or Detroit stack and you can afford that type of price wide receiver.
Absolutely. All right. Well, before we get on to the second half of the show here, just wanted to thank you all for tuning in. And if you don't mind hitting that like button, we would greatly appreciate it. Helps us keep these shows free. We'll talk a little bit about the Awesemo tools that we have available here. If you haven't signed up yet, we've got some great stuff on the site, including the my favorite tool that Awesemo releases every week is the top stacks tool, or the top quarterback, which basically gives a percentage odds as to how likely that quarterback is to be the highest scoring quarterback on the slate versus their ownership. Lets you have some leverage for GPP plays. It's a super valuable tool. So come on over, check out the site. We have packages starting as low as $3.95 per week for express packages. We also have a free NHL week going on right now. So come on over to the site, check out some of our NHL articles, and you can find out the information in that one. Give us a follow on Twitter, Osimo_com. Should probably know that, right?
Yeah, I think that's what it is.
As well, yes, Osimo_com. As well, they can follow you, Sal Vetri DFS, on Twitter. You have your own YouTube channel, which is a fantastic, must watch stuff there as well. So don't forget to go check out Sal's stuff too. All right, let's get into the second half here. So we got Buffalo, we got Carolina, we got Philly, we got Minnesota, we got the barn burner of the week. I think you know where I'm going with this one. The New York Football Jets taking on the Miami Dolphins in Miami, 3-point favorites, 42 implied total. I have no idea why the Jets are favored here. I don't think anyone should be favored. I don't think they should be favored by 3 points, but you might know this better than I do. Talk to me a little bit about this game. The first thing I noticed when I opened up this slate was Le'Veon Bell's price point in a plus matchup, one of the 3 running backs in this league getting above a 90% snap share, priced down from all the other bell cow backs. This reminds me of like a Leonard Fournette style spot here that we've seen all season. So I am super in on Le'Veon Bell, though I'm sure the ownership will be following too. Give me your thoughts on Bell and just your thoughts on this game.
Yeah, actually, I like Le'Veon Bell. So I know people are saying that he's like priced up. And honestly, with Jalen Samuels opening up and just some other value, I think he's completely fine. I think you find yourself in a range where you can fit Bell pretty easily this week and feel good about it. And you also had Le'Veon Bell this week being like the subject of trade rumors along with the entire Jets. And now he sits down with the head coach, Adam Gase, to talk about his role with the team and just wanting to see more opportunities. So he does it in a very professional manner compared to like Stephon Diggs just crying out about targets. So there's a really good chance, like under the radar, you can see Le'Veon Bell just see an increase to his touches and what would be one of the best matchups to possibly do it in. Third most fantasy points per game Miami's allowing, and they're allowing the third most rushing attempts, 203 this season. So it's a good spot. The main concern is their offensive line. They're one of the worst run blocking offensive lines in the entire league. They are going to be down 2 offensive linemen. One was cut and one is injured. Those 2 are terrible. So it's really not that big of a loss in terms of the gap of what's filling in. Maybe even it's going to be an upgrade. So it's a bad offensive line. You're facing a bad defensive line and overall defense. So Le'Veon Bell, his touches should come up this week, you would imagine, in a spot where they're rare 6-point favorites against Miami. So yeah, I would think it's a little bit high as well, the spread there, but Miami's just been so brutal. They continue to just put guys on IR that actually have skill, ship out Kenyon Drake. So yeah, Bell's the main priority for me from the Jets. That said, though, it's tough for me, and I was talking about this earlier, it's tough for me to really want Sam Darnold in stacks because both of his receivers require very specific things that don't happen often. Robbie Anderson, you need the deep ball touchdown. People think it happens every week. It happens like you're lucky if it happens once every 4 or 5 weeks. And on the Crowder side of things, you need 10 plus targets for that guy to hit because he rarely finds the end zone, and most of his targets are about 5 yards downfield. So for those 2 things to both add up, this would be the defense for it to happen against, but it's just very thin. So although I like Darnold, I don't like both of his options together. I think Crowder's fine in cash. I think Robbie Anderson's a very good tournament play. So lots of appeal from the Jets side. The most is coming from Bell and then Robbie Anderson.
Robbie Anderson tournament play. You are speaking my language, man. 14 of 16 weeks, we will lose money on him, but two of those we won't.
Yes, exactly. But and the other thing is like, I remember I was looking on, I think it was Friday, yesterday, I was looking at the ownership and like, I think he's somehow like 1% owned or something. So you're getting like what you want out of him. You're getting nobody to own the guy that, yeah, he might not hit for you majority of the time, but when he does, it's going to be huge and you're going to jump the far majority of the field.
Well, this is a pay up to be contrarian spot. I think really he's 5,500 on DraftKings, which is just nuts. So that's why the ownership is so low. 6,200 on FanDuel. And let's just look him up here on Yahoo. Why can't I find him? Robbie Anderson. So 8.3% on Yahoo, just because he's a better bargain on there. So that's the reason I think the price point is down. He hasn't really done much. He's only really had one good game, one good play really this season. But you're kind of paying for the matchup there. So one thing I did notice, though, we have Le'Veon Bell projected for fairly low ownership on DraftKings, 16% compared to 25 plus on the other sites. He's actually cheaper on FanDuel than he is on DraftKings. So a better bargain on other sites, but a better ownership value on DraftKings. So I feel like he's a pretty safe cash play, and I do like him a lot this week. But give me your thoughts on the Miami Dolphins offense before we move on here. Do you have any interest in some of these wide receivers? Preston Williams, Devontae Parker, Albert Wilson not getting much of playing time yet, even though he did have a touchdown, I believe, last week. So, do you have any interest in either of these two guys that are seeing they're seeing pretty high offensive snap shares and routes run in this offense?
Yeah, they're both like secondary options in the 4K wide receiver range. I prefer the Carolina wide receivers. I prefer Jarvis Landry. But then Mike Williams, and we'll get to those guys, are also guys I would rather have in that range. But they're definitely in play, like in terms of being in a player pool for the NFL. Love Devontae Parker, likely playing Tremaine Johnson or going up against him, who's been very injured all season. Preston Williams versus Dale Roberts. Those are two very good matchups. Preston Williams is the guy who I like his matchup more, but Fitzpatrick has been showing much more interest in Devontae Parker downfield at least. So both of these guys, just secondary options. If they end up in some of your lineups, fine. If you want to take a strong stance on them, I probably wouldn't. The main piece of this all is, though, Mark Walton. He's right there around Jalen Samuels in terms of the 4K range at running back. I think he's also viable. I think it's interesting. You could play both of them this week. It's probably limits your upside in GPPs, but I do think the amount of opportunities they get, especially in the passing game, does give them both the opportunity to score somewhere in the 18-plus fantasy point range this week. They'll both project median for around probably 14, 15 fantasy points, which is very good for their price points. So I like Mark Walton. He saw 17 overall opportunities. He ran 34 routes last week, which was pretty impressive for a team that is going to be playing from behind. At least Vegas is indicating they have been all year. 87% of the snaps. Now they might play a third running back this game. If it's Gaskin or Lard, it would cut into that workload a little bit, but I think he's going to be the main guy. CJ Mosley for the Jets linebacker is going to be out 5 to 6 weeks now. So another spot that helps Mark Walton. So yeah, I actually have a lot of interest in Mark Walton this week in that 4K running back range. And then the wide receivers are just secondary options. No real interest in Fitzpatrick. If you want to like use him as like a punt quarterback in cash, I think that's okay.
Wow. I'm kind of shocked at the ownership projection we have for Mark Walton. 22%.
Yeah, wow.
That's crazy. So that for me would be almost a full fade at that ownership, though I agree with everything you said there. And I think I was actually surprised that he's disowned, given that we have Jalen Samuels. I wouldn't be surprised if that dips down a little bit, because I can't see, this isn't a great week to pay up a wide receiver. And I can't see a lot of people going like punt, running back, plus Jalen Samuels, like doing that twice. I don't know who they're paying up for, but if they are, we're going to see some very chalky Seattle Seahawks and Tampa Bay Buccaneers teams, I'm guessing. So that's interesting. They did a pretty good job of pricing him up, actually, I thought. I didn't think it was like too much of a bargain. It certainly makes you think about rostering him. So I wouldn't be surprised to see that ownership a little bit lower come Sunday, but we will have to wait and find out for our last ownership projections. Let's move it on to the most interesting game, what to do with Jalen Samuels. We have the Indianapolis Colts -1 at the Pittsburgh Steelers, 42.5 total, pretty low total here. It looks like Malik Hooker's questionable. T.Y. Hilton is out. James Conner is doubtful and probably out. We are seeing some serious ownership on Jalen Samuels as a result. Benny Snell also out. Is that right?
Yeah, Benny Snell's going to be out about 2 to 3 weeks.
And then who was there? Oh, Benny Snell's the rookie. I'm just getting mixed up. Benny Snell's the rookie, right?
Yeah, Benny Snell's a rookie. He hasn't been all that impressive, but then the only other running back is going to be Trey Edmonds, who played a little bit in the preseason, but probably not going to be trusted with much more than 15 to 20% of the snaps at most.
Yeah, exactly. So Jalen Samuels, $4,000 on DraftKings, close to the bare min on many other sites. What are you doing with him? I know you touched on it a little earlier, but maybe you can elaborate. Like, at what point does the ownership get too much for you? Do you go underweight? Do you fade fully? Like, how are you approaching Jalen Samuels this week?
Yeah, these numbers are pretty wild, like 60% ownership or around there. I'd probably just come in on it where I'll have him in like 90+% of my lineups as of right now. If I see that number like hit 70+% ownership, which I don't think it does, but you have to start thinking if something goes completely wrong, I mean, an injury, whatever might happen, or he just is not involved. The problem is in trying to think about that, even if they get down 14 here, Jalen Samuels is going to stay on the field for every snap. And it might be even more beneficial for him because then he'll see like 10 targets. So it's just a really hard spot for a former tight end in college to fail in at that price point. Like in a GPP, yes, you want guys to score you 20 points on average, but you're going to have somebody in your lineup break free for 30 plus if you're going to be in line for potentially winning a GPP. So Jalen Samuels can win you a GPP at 15 fantasy points at that price point. It's very viable, and you probably see it happen this week if he only scores 15 because so many people are going to be playing him. So I'm not going to be getting away from it. I had like 92% Spencer Ware last week or last season when we were in a similar spot.
Yeah.
And he scored like only like 12 and a half fantasy points, which it doesn't kill your lineups at their price points. So the passing game role for Samuels is too good. The other side of that is, well, what happens if he's in 65% of lineups and is not needed? Well, you can easily jump the field, which is true. So you have to take a stance on it. You can match the field if you just don't want to take that stance, but I'm just going to come in over it. And like by the end of the day, Sunday, I wouldn't be surprised if I did a crunch, depending on what Mark Walton ends up as like a projection for me. I would not be surprised if I saw a crunch with like 95% Jalen Samuels. I think Walton's going to lower it a little bit. He'll probably come in like around 85% for me.
Yeah, makes total sense to me. We have seen it in the past. You just touched on the Spencer Ware week where he didn't really do much. I think, was he injured? I can't remember. He just didn't touch the ball. It was super weird. And it wasn't like a matchup against the Raiders or something. It was just like the most spectacular plus matchup as well. There was a spot a couple years ago where Charcuterie West was subbing in for Kareem Hunt, I think, or I can't remember. I think it was Kareem Hunt. Maybe I'm just losing it, but he was like massively owned and didn't hit. So there are examples from the past of reasons to fade, and there's really just no wrong answer here in GPPs. If you're mass multi-entering, you're probably not going to go 0% Samuels and take that strong of a stand, right? So you just kind of have to look at each. I think what Alex would say is you just kind of have to look at each unique lineup individually and try to find pivot points within those lineups.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I think like the big piece for Samuels is just a pass catching game. Like it's hard to get away from because you can say, oh, if this game gets wonky, he's done because he's a running back. But there's a really good chance he sees like 8 targets if they get down big.
Yeah, and that's a great point as well. And the matchup couldn't really be better. The Colts for the last couple of years have been one of probably second only to the Falcons in allowing receptions to opposing running backs, right? So they're just holes in that zone defense that they tend to play, and that seems to be exploitable by both tight ends and running backs. So maybe if you want to pivot, we go over to my boy Vance McDonald, who's currently killing every single one of my best ball teams. All right, I just accidentally opened Excel here. Let's move it on. You got anything else on that game?
No, I mean, like, no T.Y. Hilton, the Colts, if you want to just punt for one of their wide receivers, I don't think it's needed. Like Pascal, I think his minimum price are right around that 3K range. Like he was very good for 1 week, so a lot of people might want to punt with him. I don't know what his ownership is right now, but he only played 50% of the snaps. They run very heavy rotations. He's at 6% owned at 4,100. So they run very heavy rotations with their wide receivers. It just doesn't leave me to want to get there. If anything, it bumps up like Jack Doyle and Eric Ebron. I have probably the most interest from the Colts in Jack Doyle this week at a position where it's very easy to punt if you don't want to pay for like the top 2 or 3 guys.
Yeah, great point. I think like both Chester Rogers and Pascal are probably in play here. When T.Y. Hilton missed week 4, both of them kind of split the targets and had a pretty solid share of the passing game as well. Paris Campbell had 8 targets in that game when T.Y. Hilton missed, but only 25 yards, which is actually surprising given his speed. So I think all 3 of those guys make for some solid punt plays here. All right, let's move it on. We got the Oakland Raiders hosting the Detroit Lions. I'm kind of shocked at how high this total is, 50.5 points. Is this a case of some bad defenses or some good offenses? What's your general take when you saw this one? My mind was that I thought the line was too high, but maybe I'm just off base on this one.
Yeah, I think it's definitely bad defenses. Like Detroit's defense has been just progressively just getting much worse every single week. Like run defense has been bad all season. Mike Daniels being out for 5 weeks now has hurt that. Their pass defense, Slay being banged up for the most part of it. Their pass defense and their safeties have been just atrocious this year. And then, yeah, Oakland's probably right there with the Bengals as like the top 2 worst defenses in the league. So I think a lot of it is bad defense. I think Oakland's offense has been surprisingly good. And now you have Detroit becoming more of a passing team, which they wanted to be a running team, but no Kerryon Johnson, and the running backs in the pass and the run protection, although it's been okay, has not been enough to generate positive rushing yards at a consistent clip. So I like both of these spots. I think this is a top 2 interest of mine for overall game stacks. There's some really favorably priced guys if you start on Detroit. Yes, Kenny Galladay's all the way priced up, but I think it's fine if you want to get to him in stacks with Stafford. Stafford's also priced up, so a little bit expensive there. But I do like Marvin Jones Jr. as a secondary option for probably going to go up against Trevion Mullen, who's been playing on very limited snaps, but pretty much allowing passes on his every single one of his targets, which has been only like 7 so far this season. now that Conley is out of Oakland. And on the opposite side, I like a little bit more, whether you're stacking Detroit or stacking Oakland in terms of larger field GPPs. It's not the greatest of upsides, but you get a favorable price on Derrick Henry, on Derek Carr, who's been producing very well this season or consistent. Big games are always an issue for him. Can he break through for a huge game? But the options there are really good. Tyrell Williams, I like a lot this week, is a guy who's not picking up as much ownership, and he has a really good matchup, even if Slay is in. If Slay is not going to shadow him in this game or not really even play, you get Rashawn Melvin, who's just been getting torched left and right, 117 passer rating against. And obviously Darren Waller, you can always go to. He's probably going to be the highest raw projection for a lot of people this week. So in the passing games, it looks really good. Josh Jacobs is probably right there on the borderline of being like my fifth favorite interest at running back.
I like it. Yeah, this is an interesting spot to stack here because you're going to see some ownership. You're going to see ownership on Waller. Anyone stacking this game is probably going to have Waller. They're going to have we're getting Carr more highly owned on DraftKings and FanDuel than we are on Yahoo. So if you want to stack this one up, maybe consider heading over to Yahoo, paying up a little bit for Carr. And then I like the Tyrell Williams call. He's actually he didn't miss a beat last week, went right into his starting role, can take the top off a defense pretty easily. The question is, for me, is if you're stacking up the Raiders here, which I think I'm going to do in a few lineups for sure, who are you bringing this back with? Are you bringing it back with Kenny Golladay, who's really expensive? Are you bringing it back with Marvin Jones, who's less expensive, probably has less upside, but also no ownership? Or somebody else in the lines, a TJ Hawkinson or Danny Amendola?
Yeah, so I think I try and prioritize it to get to Golladay. If it makes your lineup somewhere else just look absolutely terrible at tight end or something, then it makes sense to save 1,700 and get to Marvin Jones. The upside is much more there for Golladay on a consistent basis. We've seen Marvin Jones ceiling games, though, and they're both going to have really good matchups. So I think that I try and first get to Kenny Golladay. Honestly, getting to both of them isn't the wildest of ideas if you want to. And 5-man stack it. But yeah, I definitely prioritize Kenny Golladay there. If it's too expensive, there's no issue with getting to Marvin Jones. I wouldn't want to get to Danny Amendola. I know he's been producing well as of late. He probably has the best individual matchup in the slot against LaMarcus Joyner, but the upside is just not there for that type of a guy who you need touchdowns out of him. Whereas with Kenny Golladay or Marvin Jones, a 100-yard game is in their back pockets in this one.
All right. I like that analysis, Sal. What about these running backs here? Josh Jacobs, any interest? Are we going to Ty Johnson this week? Terrible grade. Looks like a 3-headed monster, though. Carson? Trey?
Yeah, it's like Trey. I don't even know. But yeah, like Trey Carson's going to be like questionable. And then they have last week, like the second that they opened up a fourth running back active spot on their game, like everybody should have gotten away from Ty Johnson, at least in any stable formats. Tournament's fine, but yeah, last week was just rough for him and not a spot I want to target this backfield. But Josh Jacobs is very interesting. He's at a price point where he's kind of lost where he's priced in the mid 6K range. Not a lot of running backs there, if at all, any that really have upside. But yeah, Detroit's giving up the second most fantasy points per game to running backs, kind of very quietly. Again, we touched on Mike Daniels not being there. Josh Jacobs is seeing right now 19.7 opportunities per game, 17.7 carries per game, and he's top 8 in terms of overall running back performance on Pro Football Focus. He's top 8 in elusive rating, breaking tackles. This guy's been very good this season, and even if they're trailing by a touchdown in the game, we saw it. They were down 2 to 3 scores to Green Bay, and they kept giving Josh Jacobs carries. Like they just want to see what this kid can do. So I do like Josh Jacobs this week. He falls in a price range where if you are paying down for Samuels and paying up for a top end stud, he falls in very nicely and allows you to get up to top end wide receivers.
Yeah, it's I think as well, like he's not a bad option for a contrarian stack if you want to go with Carr. The two ways to beat this Detroit team so far have been through the tight end position and through the running back position. So they both rank poorly in the bottom 5 in DVOA, defending both of those positions. So maybe that's a way to get contrarian here, and you hope that his targets continue to rise. They haven't really been there that much this year, but we have seen, I guess not. He hasn't had more than 3 targets in a game. So maybe I take that back. That might be actually a poor decision for a stack there. But all right, let's move it on. I don't want to talk anymore about the Detroit Lions because I'm bitter about my $80 Ty Johnson waiver wire bids that I won in like every single week. So perhaps the most fun game of the week. Seattle and Josh Gordon, who is not going to play, -5, hosting the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, 52.5 total, the highest implied total on the slate. OJ Howard is out. Cameron Brate is questionable. All right, let's get to the big question here. Are we going to see preseason Travis Kelce, Tanner Hudson if these two are out?
Man, he was probably the best play in the whole preseason, like week to week.
I played him every single slate.
Yeah, I did too. The first like 3 weeks until that last week where they just like didn't need him. But Tanner Hudson was great. Yeah, we got to watch what happens there. I haven't even really been thinking about that all that much, but obviously did all of his damage with like Ryan Griffin or whoever their like third string quarterback was. But yeah, we actually have to monitor that because he's a productive tight end that's probably min price. But nothing of a priority right now. But yeah, the Tampa Bay side, I really like this game. It becomes very difficult to, I would say, maybe not difficult, but you have to prioritize it because yes, Evans and Godwin, who I prefer Godwin this week slightly over Evans just because of matchup. But they're both in good spots. If you want to stack it with Winston, which I think is fine as an underdog here, they're going to probably throw the ball a ton. I don't care if he throws interceptions. That's fine. It probably helps him for fantasy. Just throw the ball more than after that downfield. So you get a Seattle secondary that's top 10 in points to the quarterback position, third most passing yards this season. They're not that great, this secondary. They're just kind of being masked up right now by some victories and not getting talked about all that much, even though they shipped out like every single good piece of it. Shaq Griffin, the only quality guy back there, but he'll probably just be wasted on a guy like Rashad Perriman in this game. So it's a good spot for Winston. If you want to run the game stack, though, you're kind of forced to run in DK Metcalf with it, only because Chris Carson's priced up, not the greatest of correlating options in a bad matchup, and Tyler Lockett is priced up. So really, I mean, trying to play Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, and Tyler Lockett's a really difficult task to do and then get anywhere good in your lineup after that. So that seems like the most straightforward game stack if you're going with Tampa Bay. I think it's fine to do. I like all the options. Jameis right now is a top 3 quarterback interest of mine. Russell Wilson on the other side of this is a top 3 quarterback interest of mine as well. And we can get into that. But what is your stance on the Bucs?
It's tough calls. So there are a lot of things that I mean, a lot of things going on here, right? Because one thing is like if you want to stack up the Bucks and Winston, that's great. But like we haven't seen Mike Evans and Godwin go off together in the same game yet. It just seems like it's one or the other. Maybe that's coming, and maybe a contrarian move would be to stack both of them up. Unfortunately, they're both getting ownership here. So, but if you are going to stack Winston, you kind of want both of them, right? If you're paying up that much. One take I do have is that I'm kind of surprised about Chris Carson's ownership here. Is the industry just getting sharper to the point where they've realized that usage trumps matchup? And like, because my initial take when I saw that was like full fade Chris Carson, or not full fade, but fade Chris Carson, just because Tampa Bay's run defense has been so stout. And I believe up until last week, they ranked number 1 in DVOA. They're probably, they're number 2 in DVOA to running backs behind the 49ers right now. So am I crazy for valuing that extremely difficult matchup against the Bucs, or is it a case that perception hasn't really caught up to reality and people don't realize that the Bucs run defense is very good?
Yeah, I think there's like parts of both of that in there. I think people don't realize it, but I also think people just want a ton of Chris Carson because of his usage. But like his price point is up, his ownership is up, and he has probably the most difficult matchup you'll see. Like the Bucs shut down McCaffrey 3 out of 4 quarters and for an entire game. Like that's very difficult to do. Carson is nowhere near as dynamic in terms of the passing game and just versatility. So they got Jason Pierre-Paul back last week, the Bucs, and that just made their defensive line even better. So not really a spot I find myself getting to Chris Carson. His ownership is just making me not want it even more. Like in the exact same range, a guy who's also picking up ownership, but not as much. And like Nick Chubb, I don't have much interest in Chubb, and we'll get to it. But this week, it's just an easier fade for me to get away from Carson in this matchup. Even if he does see 20 plus touches, that's the argument for him. And also the argument he's a 6-point home favorite, and Pete Carroll loves to run the ball as a home favorite. That kind of scares me. For this whole game, that seems like a very good spot to stack. There's spots that it just gets completely wonky. I think Tampa Bay is a little bit more secure because, Russell Wilson, he might only throw 28 times in this game, and you could have Chris Carson running 22 times for 88 yards and just being very ineffective, but they're controlling the game because when you have a home favorite in Seattle, Pete Carroll is completely fine with Russell Wilson throwing the ball like 22 to 25 times. And we saw it, I'm pretty sure, just last week alone when they're up in games. They're just not going to throw the ball.
Yeah, all great points. Really interesting one here, and I feel like this is going to be the key to the entire slate. If you can figure this one out and get it right, and the thing is, like, the ownership is so high that you almost have to find, like, if you're stacking this game up, that means that you're probably going to Jeff Wilson, and you're probably going to Jalen Samuels. You're probably going to be finding you're probably going to be inclined to find some very chalky cheaper options. And so you're going to want to obviously not do that if you're playing all of these guys at 22%. So just be cognizant of that if you are stacking up this game, because we're not seeing like any low ownership on any of these guys. And just a note on Cameron Braid as well, he was a full participant in practice on Friday, so I think we would expect him to go. The only pivot that I can see that's even like remotely interesting to me maybe would be David Moore at a super cheap rate. He is getting about 50% offensive snap rate. But, that's not great on a team that runs the ball the fourth most in the entire NFL.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the issue there. It's like DK Metcalf is like your cheapest option for stacks or just at all in this game on either side. And he's chalky. And he's probably had an inflated price point for one, the matchup, but two, like he played a ton of snaps last week, but both of his touchdowns were just wide open. Like he didn't do anything to get open on 2 goal line touchdowns. The defense just lost him somehow. So he's kind of inflated price point at 5,700. I think he's a fine play because of the matchup still and got a ton of usage last week and 92% of the snaps, but he's also chalky. So yeah, like you were saying, like if you want to stack this game up, there's very limited ways you can do it. And there's also a lot of ways things go wonky for the Seattle side of it.
Yeah. We'll have to think more about that one. I'm curious to see what the Awesome with Top Stacks tool says tomorrow, because my guess is that it's going to be going over owned relative to the chance that there is that it is the top stack of the day, or at the very least it will go equal weight. So maybe finding some pivot points is a good idea, but I don't know. I don't know what to do with it.
I think like the closing thoughts on that, I do want to see what that tool says too, but I think we're kind of already talking through a lot of the issues with it. Is that if it's going to be chalky, and like you said, like the big piece is Godwin and Evans don't go off together, but now they're both priced at price points where you need to get like 20 plus points out of them and their ownership even more for it to pay off. So it seems like a spot that clearly is a good game environment, but the way that DraftKings priced it makes it very hard for it to all work out without eating chalk everywhere in a tournament. And you can eat a lot of chalk, but you don't want to do it in every single spot, especially if some of it is overpriced.
Yeah. Great points. I like, the more I think about it, I'm like, how does this game not shoot out though? It's like,
yeah.
All right, let's move it on. We got 2 games left in the main slate. I'll get your just quick thoughts as well on New England, Baltimore, and then we will take a few questions from people in chat for Sal. If you have any pressing fantasy football questions or DFS questions, you can think of those and fire away in about 10 minutes. If you are watching and you haven't hit that like button yet, we would greatly appreciate it if you do. Helps us keep these videos free, and we are very thankful for it. So, all right, Cleveland, Denver, really interesting game here. Flacco is out. Cleveland is favored by 3.5 points, only a 39-point total here. No many Sanders. We have some really, Brandon Allen. I don't know if I said that. He's starting for the Denver Broncos, his first start in the NFL, I believe. We have some interesting spots here because, depending on how good Brandon Allen is, he might be terrible, but Deshaun Hamilton, maybe a decent flyer. Noah Fant is possibly a great play in this spot with no Jeff Hireman in there. So what's your takeaway from this one? Are you back in the Cleveland side here? I was surprised at just how low this total was.
Yeah, the total is the big issue. I think that a big piece of it is you just get value if you want to punt tight end this week with Noah Fant. Like Jeff Hirman is out. That probably is going to go unnoticed that Jeff Hirman is out, but Noah Fant ran 82% of the snaps last week, and then you had 8 targets from him. So you're getting a $3,000 tight end with surely a backup quarterback who really for all parts coming out of college and the things that he did in the combine or whatever it really was, has not looked like somebody who's going to stay in this league. So I don't really have any confidence in Brandon Allen. But with Noah Fant out there at $3,000 and the guy that you probably see him throw the ball to the most, the offense becomes narrower around these running backs. I think he's a decent punt play. That's really it on Denver, though. I think Cortland Sutton's floor and ceiling are both capped with the quarterback play that he has now. Also, Emmanuel Sanders being shipped out will also help the middle of the field with Noah Fant. Cleveland side of it, yeah, I don't really want Odell. Odell is going to be in a shadow matchup where so far this season, 3 Chris Harrell shadow matchups. You got 2 catches for 13 yards from Allen Robinson, 2 catches for 36 yards from Devontae Adams, and 2 catches for 54 yards for T.Y. Hilton. Just a brutal spot for a team that is having trouble scheming Odell open somehow. I think Jarvis Landry is the best play in the overall game. $4,500 is too cheap of a price point. If you have Odell taken out of this game, Landry is going to have to do more out of the slot and has a beneficial matchup. And then the last piece of it is Nick Chubb. Nick Chubb comes in right around kind of Josh Jacobs for me as like a 5th or 6th running back option. I like the 2 pay-up spots. I like Jalen Samuels. And then Le'Veon Bell and Aaron Jones I prefer over Nick Chubb this week, especially if Devontae Adams is out. Aaron Jones, if Devontae Adams in, it becomes a little bit closer. But Nick Chubb's ownership is up, and it's a really brutal matchup. Nick Chubb, though, number 1 in breakaway percentage, top 3 in elusive rating, top 3 overall graded running back. So he's a really good running back in a really bad spot. So I'll have some of him. I'll probably be below the field, which is at 20%. I think I'd probably come in around 12 or 15 right now.
Wow, yeah, that's a lot. Great analysis there as well on Chris Harris. I was actually did not realize how low price Jarvis Landry was, and they're moving Chris Harris out into the. They've been using him out wide this season, correct? So
Yeah, like
way more.
yeah, that's been like the biggest difference is he was a primary slot cornerback. He's played like 10 slot snaps all season long. He's been dominant.
Yeah. That's crazy. Like what a strange change. I mean, especially with the emergence and the importance of the slot position, you would think they wouldn't want to mess with a good thing, but it does seem to be working for them so far. So yeah, love the Jarvis Landry call. I like the Nick Chubb call as well. I mean, Denver's pretty good at defending the run, at least according to DVOA, but this is a plus matchup, and you could see a scenario like the old school pairing the Cleveland Browns with Nick Chubb, I think is probably not a bad move in a game like this, because if the Cleveland Browns defense goes off, then you're probably looking at a very heavy workload for Nick Chubb.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And yeah, it's not like I thought Nick Chubb was going to be lower owned and that you can have him as a good contrarian tournament play. But if you're playing him, you're eating chalk technically this week at 20%.
Yeah. And what's your take? I know you just touched on it a little bit. Are you going to get to any Noah Fant at this price? Like the targets seem to be there recently. Is this like just too? Is the quarterback situation just too gross? Like I don't really like. Initially, I was high on him just because of the price point and the opportunity there. But there's just a chance that Allen is absolutely terrible.
Yeah, like I mean, you have a week where Zach Ertz is so cheap, so like he's my priority this week is Zach Ertz, and you have a lot of punt options with Jack Doyle opening up. So like I prefer Jack Doyle in that range. I prefer probably even I prefer Braid even Greg Olson. So I do think Noah Fant's interesting, but yeah, like you said, like there could be a really good chance there's like 120 passing yards by Brandon Allen in this game, and just the overall upside for this whole offense is going to be capped, and for Fant it would hurt a lot. So the opportunity should be there, increase for Fant. The overall quarterback's not great. So on a week where it seems like punting tight end becomes the most viable that it has been all season, he's definitely in play, but probably like the third or fourth option.
All right, I like it. Favorite plays? I think we're both in agreement here that Jarvis Landry just far too cheap on this slate. I just want to have a look at how Osimo is grading him. C for points, B for value, but this slate is actually lacking a lot of wide receiver value, so I don't think that's too bad. I will definitely be going to him. And he's really not getting that much ownership, which is kind of surprising. So definitely going to have some Jarvis Landry. All right, final game on the main slate here. We have the Green Bay Packers -3.5 points at the Los Angeles Chargers, 48.5 total. Devontae Adams questionable, though I did see him on Twitter doing like a full leap over a player in practice. I'm assuming that means he's probably good to go, right?
Yeah, I don't know. So this is my thing. Yeah, like I saw that same exact video. Like it seems like he should be good. Like turf toe is something that you can't put a lot of impact on, but you also need to be able to cut. So we'll see what happens. They said 90 minutes before lock. When inactives come out, we'll know about. But yeah, he took a huge step forward this week. If he plays, though, I don't feel really confident that they give him a full workload right back, unless it's a spot where he just feels completely fine. But we won't really know that the entire game. So it's really a risk. I don't really want Devontae Adams this week because of that and the price point. It's a fine price point if he plays 100% of the snaps. I just don't feel confident that he does if he plays at all. I like Aaron Jones the most from the Packers. So Aaron Rodgers is priced up, and he's been stellar the last 2 weeks. And as a Packers fan, like trying not to be biased, he's looked good, but he's been very much the benefit of the scheme, like just getting running backs on linebackers. He had 23 completions last week, 10 to running backs. They're just doing everything for him. And sure, he's not turning the ball over like he never does, and he's hitting fantastic throws like he usually does, but he's not playing anything different than the first 5 weeks. It's just the scheme using running backs more. So that's going to help Aaron Jones. Even with Devontae Adams back, Aaron Jones will remain the number 2 wide receiver on this team as a running back. None of the other wide receivers stand out. Jamal Williams, in my opinion, although he's on the field a lot, he is just a little bit too priced up as a guy who at best is going to see like 40% of the snaps, and maybe you get 10 touches out of him. That's a steep price to pay at 5,900. Becomes more attractive if Adams is out, but probably not a spot I get to. So I really just want Aaron Jones from the Packers side of it. I think Aaron Rodgers is a little bit too priced up for me, especially if Adams does miss or is limited.
Yeah, all great points. I was actually thinking like the reason I was into Devontae Adams this week was just as a pivot with people being afraid that he wasn't going to go as a question mark. but it looks like he's getting ownership. So just because the price is down there. So I think that's going to be a fade from me as well. He is fairly like he's a bargain if he's healthy, but
Yeah.
I guess like the other reason that he's probably getting ownership is there are pivot spots in this afternoon games that allow people to roster him with confidence and then switch out to a Tyler Lockett, Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, other players that you're not going to get caught leaving $2,000 in salary on the table. So that's going to force his ownership up probably a little bit.
Yeah, and especially if like his ownership is coming up, that's sort of like the biggest part of your edge is kind of gone. So yeah, I mean the practice tape looked good of him. It's very limited, and it's by far not a full game of practice. You're seeing like whatever highlights you see, it's like 5 plays of him running where he's might not run a full 40 routes or 35 routes in the game, and I really don't expect him to coming off of turf. Though it's something that can be re-aggravated very easily.
What about the Chargers side of this one? They're probably flying a little bit under the radar. First I should mention, I know you said Aaron Jones, but LA been really, really bad against running backs.
Yeah. Yeah. They've been just beat up on defense. Their 2 defensive tackles were out last week, and Ingram continues to be limited. So that's something that's going to continue to happen this week with injuries on their defensive line. And that just makes it even better of a spot for both Packers running backs and definitely Jones.
We have Jones projected around 20% ownership. He is priced up as well, but I definitely like the spot. So we're just like unearthing some seriously decent, maybe not unearthing is a strong word, but there are some solid running back. There's some solid running back options on this slate. So, all right, Chargers side of this thing, Keenan Allen hasn't done much. He did end up playing last week, battling through. Green Bay Packers initially were really bad against the run, but have tightened things up a little bit of late. So this isn't the smash spot I think we saw. You might be thinking if you're relying on some early season data for Melvin Gordon or Austin Eckler. Do you have any interest in the Chargers side of this game?
Yeah, so like the biggest concern is the Packers have the best pass rush advantage on the entire weekend. If you just look at Pro Football Focus against this offensive line, so that really hurts Rivers' upside. But he's priced down a ton. He's a home underdog, which we love to see for quarterbacks, just for fantasy purposes, for production. So 5,100, it's fine for GPPs. It's the biggest headache of this team though, because the production can go in so many places. So if you're using a lot of lineups or just Fantasy Cruncher in general, I think the group that you use, and for me, it's going to be Eckler, Hunter Henry, from at least the Chargers side of it. Eckler, Hunter Henry, Mike Williams, and Keenan Allen. I wouldn't put Melvin Gordon in it with Phillip Rivers, but that's 4 guys that can potentially take a slate down if this is the winning GPP stack. And it's just really hard to prioritize those guys who some are going to be in just really difficult matchups. So I think Hunter Henry is the stable piece of all of it. He's my favorite guy from the Chargers side. Keenan Allen is going to be in the slot, which has been a good spot for the Packers when they're in man-to-man coverage and zone coverage, which they do play some. They've been really bad against the slot, but in man-to-man, Tyrell Williams has only given up 8 catches through 8 games for 14 yards per week. And then they also have Jair Alexander, who should be on Mike Williams on the outside. And then when Keenan Allen is in the slot. So really brutal matchup all around when you take into account the combination of the Packers secondary plus their pass rush. But for GPPs, Phillip Rivers has been able to stand upright enough, has not faced a matchup like this. For GPPs at that price point, I think you can take stabs. I think my favorite stack option is definitely going to include Hunter Henry and then just kind of pivot through the rest of the receivers in Williams, Keenan Allen, and even Austin Eckler.
I like that approach. I'm pretty high on Mike Williams. I think Osmo as well has him graded out pretty well. Tough matchup, as you mentioned, but getting like just a huge snap share, huge routes run share, leading the team the past 2 weeks. His targets were really high in weeks 5 and 6 against Pittsburgh and Denver. 2 tough matchups against Tennessee. Well, Tennessee, I guess not anymore. Chicago last week, where he had a 6 for 70 line. He's just like he's not as expensive enough, I think. And and the ownership also isn't following despite the matchup. So you're getting him at under 10%.
Yeah, I think the main thing for Mike Williams is like he'll probably see the majority of this game, Jair Alexander, which is terrible, and the offensive line play. It makes it limited for his deep play attempts, but there'll still be some attempts. And like you said, it's the price point. That's the biggest thing. You get an advantage of price point. When Keenan Allen's not in the slot, you probably get Kevin King on Mike Williams, which is a benefit for Mike Williams. The only thing that I've been seeing is obviously he has no touchdowns. He scored like 10 last year. He outperformed last year to score those 10, but he's surely going to catch some touchdowns. But like for the people, like the Leonard Fournette theory is he's getting goal line looks and like he's going to score more touchdowns there. Mike Williams has dropped 3 touchdowns this year. Like his opportunities are there. He just hasn't caught them. So like the positive progression for Mike Williams it'll come because he won't end the season with 0 touchdowns, but he's already had 3 opportunities to catch touchdowns. He's already kind of in line with what he should be doing this year. He just hasn't come through on his end. So the price point is still fair on him for a tough matchup. And I do think this Chargers team is a sneaky stack. Just a really brutal offensive versus defensive line matchup.
Yeah, I was not expecting to be talking about Mike Williams needing some positive touchdown regression this year, but here we are. It's the exact opposite of last year. All right, that's going to do it for the main slate here. If you guys have any questions in YouTube and chat, please let us know. Just fire a couple away, and we'll try and maybe spend 5 minutes having Sal answer them. While you guys are doing that, maybe let's just briefly touch on this New England Baltimore game, because it is going to be on the Yahoo and Fantasy Draft slates. We got Lamar Jackson, who has torched man-to-man defenses thus far in his career. Are you going to be rostering him at all? He's very expensive on some of these sites on Yahoo and Fantasy Draft, so he's not a great play. What are your general thoughts on this game?
Yeah, so I'm not going to get to Lamar this week. Honestly, in season long, I think it's a fine debate. I know his rushing upside's there, but brutal matchup. I think it's a fine debate. If you have any sort of quality backup, if you have projections, or even if you don't, like, that just seems like a fine play. I would start him over Lamar this week, even if Lamar's been kind of riding your team all season long. I've already done that so far this week in a spot. I'm going to be starting somebody else over Lamar Jackson. Doesn't feel great just because he's been so good, but it's just a matchup there. Maybe he's kind of the kryptonite for them, but I don't really foresee that happening. Outside of that, yeah, it's every single week. This team is just a brutal team to kind of scheme against the Patriots. I don't really want much of Baltimore. Mark Andrews is a quality tight end who probably gets taken away by Bill Belichick here. You have a lot of guys coming into this game questionable. It's just a spot where I think Mohamed Sanu stands out, but the Ravens secondary has just improved. I mean, through a trade, through getting Jimmy Smith back in terms of getting healthy. So the secondary looks really good now after it didn't look good for the first month of the season. They got healthier. They made a trade for Marcus Peters. So it's a spot where I just don't really want anything. The pieces that stand out the most are probably the running backs for the Patriots, but even that's not that great.
All right. A couple questions for you in chat. We have 2 Colts related questions. What do you think about Zach Pascal from Brian Van Warmer? And are you into Doyle or Ebron?
Yeah, I want Doyle the most out of all those options, even with Pascal. So Doyle between the two of them. I'm probably not going to get to Zach Pascal. If he was like the absolute, and what is his price point again? I think it's like in the 4K. Yeah, it's 4,100. If he was like 3,300 or something, I'd take a shot on him. But I know he had the one big game, but that's not going to happen. And he had that big game on 50% of the snaps, so it was just very fluky. It's just a spot where it's a really good defensive matchup against them as well. Pittsburgh Steelers not letting a lot over the top on them since Minkah Fitzpatrick got there. So yes, he's cheap, but he's also $400 less than Jarvis Landry, who more times than not is going to outscore him. And Jarvis Landry, like we said, not coming in that highly owned. So it's just a spot where I actually do like Jack Doyle as sort of a puntier type tight end, but no interest in right now Zach Pascal.
Okay, we got one more question for you. Zachary Gilbert says, what defenses and special teams are you targeting this week?
Yeah, so the answer to that is right now I have no idea. I'll be so I guess there's a high level answer every single week for me. Is usually I get $3,000 or below defenses at home who are going to be favorites or at least have a good pass rush against the offensive line. So there's a couple that stand out this week. You have the Eagles; they're going to be at home against Mitch Trubisky at 3,000 flat. You have Denver; they're going to be at home against a very bad offensive line in Cleveland, coming to town with Baker, who's been making mistakes, and a lot of that is because of his offensive line. Those are 2 that stand out. You also have very cheap options that stand out as well. Like the Steelers are at home against the Colts, who have a good offensive line, but it's also the Steelers defense that has improved so much over the past month for 2,400. So those are the types of defenses I usually end up getting to. It's the last thing that I get to in my lineups, but it just saves you so much more. Like if you can save $1,000 on a defense going off of the Bills to like the Steelers, and you're saving $1,400, you can just get up to a much, much better wide receiver or running back by doing that.
All right, that is going to do it for us. Thank you all very much for tuning in. If you don't mind hitting that like button on the way out, we would greatly appreciate it. We have On the Contrary coming up on the Awesemo YouTube network. That is at 11 o'clock Eastern. Jeff Ulrich from the Fantasy Grind, or from DraftKings, and he does quite a number of different shows along the industry. Great guy. He's going to be breaking down some contrarian, some sleeper picks with Chris Spags and Awesemo as well. We have tomorrow morning. We have our 3 shows tomorrow before the slate locks. We're going to do live before lock. We're going to do the usual show with Lofty, Ben, and Alex. And then we also have a new injuries and inactives show with Sam Smith and Eric Vodvodich, which will carry you through. It's about a 20-minute just highlighting some of the inactives and injuries as they come in, 20-minute intermission show. So basically you got 3 straight hours of Awesemo content tomorrow morning to get you set up for your DFS lineups. That's going to do it for us. Make sure to come on over to awesemo.com and check out everything we have to offer. You can follow Sal Vetri DFS over on Twitter, and check out his YouTube channel as well, because it is great. I watch it every week. And thanks so much for doing this. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we will catch you